There is a mansion in North Texas that looks like it was lifted straight out of the French countryside. Stone towers, manicured gardens, a ballroom, a wine cellar, a home theater. Everything that money, ambition, and extraordinary craftsmanship can produce. Sitting on a quiet stretch of land about 30 miles north of Dallas. The people who built it spent $46 million doing so. And then, years later, they couldn't find a single buyer willing to pay even a fraction of that. This is Chateau. And what happened to it is one of the strangest, most quietly devastating stories in American real estate history. Chateau means field of gold in French. And when this property first appeared in the Texas luxury real estate market, that name felt appropriate. This was not just a large house. This was a statement. Over 26,000 square feet of custom construction, built with materials and craftsmanship you simply don't find in residential real estate at any price point. People who toured it described it as walking into a European palace. That's not an exaggeration. It was designed to feel like a different world entirely. And at first glance, it looked like the deal of a lifetime. Let's be specific about what this property actually contained, because the scale of it matters to understanding what came next. Chateau had a formal ballroom large enough to host hundreds of guests, a wine cellar, a home theater, an indoor pool, multiple guest suites, a commercial-grade kitchen, formal gardens with manicured hedges and stone pathways. Every surface was custom. Every detail was deliberate. This was not a spec home, a house built for general tastes and sold to whoever arrived next. This was built for one person's very specific vision of what a perfect home should look like. And that, quietly, was already the beginning of the problem. Here's something important that the photos don't tell you. Chateau is not in Beverly Hills. It's not in the Hamptons. It's not in a neighborhood where ultra-luxury properties regularly change hands for 8 or 9 figures. It's in Hickory Creek, Texas, a small city in Denton County about 30 miles north of Dallas. A suburb. A pleasant, quiet, ordinary suburb, where the surrounding market is built around family homes and mid-range properties, not French chateaus. And that gap between what the house was and where the house was would turn out to be one of the most damaging things about it. $46 million. That's what it cost to build Chateau. Not to buy it, to build it, to put that number in perspective. That's more than the construction cost of many 4-star hotels, more than some public government buildings, more than entire residential developments with dozens of homes. When people hear that figure, the first question is always the same. How? How does a private home cost $46 million to build? The answer is in the details. Hand-carved stone, custom ironwork, imported materials, one-of-a-kind finishes that required specialized craftspeople. Some brought in specifically for this project, for this house, for this vision. Everything was the most expensive option available. When Chateau first entered the market, the asking price reflected, at least partially, what had gone into it. It was listed at figures that placed it among the most expensive private residences in the entire state of Texas. And the response from the market was quiet, not hostile, not critical, just quiet. Buyers came and looked. Buyers appreciated what they saw. And then buyers walked away. Because what they were looking at was extraordinary and extraordinarily difficult to justify purchasing. Real estate agents who showed the property described a very consistent pattern. Buyers would walk in and be genuinely stunned by what they were seeing. The quality was undeniable. The scale was breathtaking. But then the questions would start. What does it cost to heat this place? How many staff would you need to run it properly? What are the property taxes? What would insurance look like? And, quietly, always, what would happen if I ever needed to sell? Those questions had a way of cooling things down very quickly, because owning Chateau wasn't just buying a house. It was taking on an operation, a full-time, expensive, complicated operation. Now, you might be thinking, surely somewhere in the world there's a buyer with $46 million in taste and the money to match. Surely someone exists for a property like this. That's a fair instinct. And the honest answer is, maybe. Somewhere. But the problem with Chateau was never really the house itself. The house was, by almost any objective measure, extraordinary. The problem was everything surrounding it. The location, the market, the maintenance costs, the financing walls, the logic or lack of logic in the purchase itself. And to understand why this house stayed empty for years, you have to understand each one of those problems in turn. Because they didn't just make the house hard to sell. Together, they made it nearly impossible. Texas has a serious luxury real estate market. Dallas, in particular, has neighborhoods where 8-figure homes do sell, consistently with competitive offers at prices that hold over time. But those markets are concentrated. Preston Hollow, Highland Park. Specific zip codes with long histories of ultra-high net worth buyers, prestigious addresses, and established resale records. Hickory Creek is not one of those zip codes, and that matters more than most people realize. Because in real estate, location doesn't just affect how desirable a property feels. It affects what a property is worth, to a lender, to an appraiser, to any buyer trying to get financing. Chateau was a $46 million property in a market with no comparable sales. None. And without comparables, valuation becomes almost impossible. So here's where things stood. A mansion unlike almost anything else in American residential real estate. Built at a cost of $46 million. Sitting in a location that had never supported a sale anywhere close to that number. On paper, it was spectacular. In reality, it was quietly becoming something else, a very expensive problem. And the longer it sat on the market, the worse that problem got. Let's talk about what it actually costs to own a property like Chateau. Not to buy it, to own it. Because that distinction is critical here. A home of over 26,000 square feet, with indoor pools, formal gardens, complex mechanical systems, custom surfaces that require specialized care, does not run cheaply. Estimates for annual operating costs on properties of this type typically run into hundreds of thousands of dollars. For Chateau specifically, some industry observers suggested that keeping the house in proper condition could cost close to $500,000 per year. Or more. That's before you've paid a mortgage, before property taxes, before insurance, before staff. $500,000 a year. Just to keep the lights on. Texas has no state income tax. That's one of the primary reasons wealthy people relocate there. But Texas does have property taxes, and they are significant. For a property assessed in the multi-million-dollar range in Denton County, annual property tax bills can easily reach 6 figures every single year, regardless of whether the property is occupied, regardless of whether it's generating any return. Every month that Chateau sat empty, property taxes were still accruing. The house wasn't making money. It was costing money. Constantly, quietly, without pause. Insuring a property like Chateau is its own separate challenge. Standard homeowners insurance doesn't apply to a property of this nature. You need specialized high-value coverage. And to price that coverage correctly, insurers need a reliable property valuation. But here's the complication. How do you properly value a property that has no comparable sales in its area? Insurance companies, like lenders, work from comparable data. When there's nothing to compare to, the process gets complicated, slow, and expensive. Some ultra-luxury properties in unusual markets end up carrying coverage that doesn't fully reflect their actual replacement cost, simply because the insurance infrastructure doesn't exist at that level in that location. Here's something most people don't consider when they look at a property like this. Even buyers who could theoretically pay cash for a $10 million home want to know that the asset is financeable, now and in the future. Because a property that no bank will lend against at a reasonable valuation is effectively illiquid. And illiquid assets are dangerous to own. Chateau had a financing problem. Without comparable sales, lenders couldn't support an appraisal. Without a supportable appraisal, no loan. Without financing options, the buyer pool collapsed. You weren't just looking for someone with $10 million to spend. You were looking for someone willing to commit that money to something they might never be able to sell at a rational price. That is a very small group of people. There's another layer here that's easy to overlook. Chateau was built as a French chateau. Stone towers, ornate interiors, deep formality, a property that requires a very specific buyer, not just in terms of financial resources, but in terms of aesthetic identity. And the Texas luxury buyer, broadly speaking, is not that buyer. Texas luxury tends toward modern ranch architecture, open concept living, outdoor entertainment spaces that connect to the land. Wide, warm, expansive. Chateau offered almost the opposite. Formal, indoor, European. A vision of grandeur that was genuinely beautiful and genuinely out of step with the market it was sitting in. Would you still want it once you understood that? That the thing you loved about the house was exactly what made it nearly impossible to sell. Eventually, anyone working seriously with Chateau ran into the same wall. What is this property actually worth? Not what it cost to build, not what the owner hoped for, not what it looked like it should be worth based on the quality of craftsmanship. What would a willing buyer, a genuinely motivated buyer with full knowledge of the situation, actually pay? And what number would an appraiser stand behind? When people were being fully honest, the answer was uncomfortable, because the only real market signal was the auction floor price, roughly $10 million, less than a quarter of the construction cost. The market wasn't saying the house was bad. It was saying, we don't need this, not here, not at any number that reflects what went into it. Properties like this don't fail overnight. They fail slowly. And slow failure has its own particular kind of damage. Every year that Champdor sat unsold, it accumulated something more damaging than dust: stigma. Buyers who encounter a home that's been listed for 3, 4, or 5 years ask the same question immediately. What's wrong with it? What are we not seeing? Even if the answer was nothing that photographs can show you, the time on market itself became a warning sign. And warning signs, in luxury real estate, are almost impossible to overcome. At some point, the conventional approach stopped being viable. There was no traditional path to a buyer. The market had made that clear. So the decision was made to try something different: a high-end property auction, handled through concierge auctions, one of the most respected luxury auction firms in the United States. The logic was simple. Stop waiting for a buyer who may never materialize. Set a floor price. Let the market speak directly. That floor price was set at approximately $10.3 million. Let that land for a moment. A home that cost $46 million to build. Entering auction at $10.3 million. $46 million, down to 10. That's not just a financial loss, though the financial loss is enormous. It's something harder to process. Someone built Champdor as a dream, a statement, a home that would be unlike anything else around it. And the market's response, communicated slowly over years of silence, then loudly through an auction floor number, was essentially this: what you built has almost no relationship to what we are willing to pay. That gap between what a thing costs and what a thing is worth is one of the most painful lessons real estate has to teach. And Champdor delivered it at scale. So what actually happened at that auction? Did someone finally step forward and buy Champdor? Did the market find a buyer at $10.3 million? Or did the story get worse? Because in real estate, and in stories like this one, things don't always end the way logic would suggest. And the answer here is more complicated than a simple yes or no. The auction for Champdor did generate attention. Properties like this, listed through high-end firms with international reach, attract a specific kind of buyer. Collectors of rare properties, people who follow the ultra-luxury market, individuals looking for something that simply cannot be found anywhere else. Interest existed. That much is true. But interest and bids are different things. And the bids that came in were what they were. No dramatic bidding war. No moment where the room erupted and the price climbed back toward something that honored what had been built. The market spoke. And it spoke quietly and at its own pace, and at a number that had nothing to do with $46 million. Here's the thing about buyers who show up to an auction like this. They are not emotional. They are calculated. They're looking at a property that costs somewhere near $500,000 a year to maintain. They're looking at a location with no established comparable sales. They're looking at a style that appeals to a vanishingly small number of buyers globally. And they're looking at a resale situation that offers no clear exit. Because the same problems that made Champdor nearly impossible to sell in the first place would still exist after purchase. The location wouldn't change. The maintenance costs wouldn't change. The market wouldn't suddenly decide it wanted a French chateau in Hickory Creek, Texas. A buyer at that auction wasn't just buying a house. They were buying the problem. Realistically, who is the right buyer for Champdor? Think it through carefully. You need someone with the financial resources to purchase and maintain a $10 million plus property that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to run. You need someone who genuinely wants a 26,000 square foot French chateau. In North Texas, you need someone who doesn't care about resale, who isn't worried about comparables or appraisals or what happens in 10 years when they need to exit. That buyer exists somewhere. But they are so rare, so specific, that finding them through any conventional channel, even a global luxury auction, is closer to luck than strategy. Champ d'Or is not just a failed listing. It's a lesson about something much larger. The housing market, at every level, is ultimately about what other people will pay. Not what you think something is worth, not what it costs to produce, not what it deserves based on quality, craft, or ambition. What other people will pay. And when you build something so specific, so singular, so disconnected from the preferences and logic of the market around it, you are essentially building something for an audience of one. If that person is you, and you intend to live there forever, that might be fine. But the moment you need to sell, you need the market. And the market is not obligated to care about your vision. What happened to Champ d'Or is not an isolated incident. It belongs to a pattern that repeats itself across ultra-luxury real estate. A wealthy individual builds something extraordinary, pours money, taste, and years of decision-making into a property that reflects a very personal vision. And then circumstances change. The property needs to be sold, and suddenly the real bill arrives, not in construction costs, in market reality. Because the market doesn't buy intentions. It doesn't price vision. It buys what it can use, what it can finance, and what it can sell again someday. Everything else is overhead. We spend most of our time in stories like this talking about financial loss. And the financial loss here is genuinely staggering. But there's a human dimension that's easy to overlook. Someone built Champ d'Or, chose every stone, every chandelier, every garden path, spent years making decisions, solving problems, building something they believed would stand apart from everything around it. And then the market responded, in the coldest, most impersonal way possible, by assigning it a value that had nothing to do with the love or money that went into it. That's not just a financial blow. It's something that takes a different kind of toll. If there's a practical lesson in all of this, it's blunt. The market is always the final judge. You can build the most extraordinary thing in the world. You can spend more than anyone around you has ever spent on a single residence. You can create something with no equal in a 100-mile radius. But if it's in the wrong location, in the wrong style, at the wrong cost structure, for the wrong market, none of that craftsmanship matters when the time comes to sell. The market will find the price it's comfortable with. And it will not be moved, not by beauty, not by craftsmanship, not by the story of how something was made. Champ d'Or makes that truth impossible to ignore. As of the public record available on Champ d'Or, this property remains one of the most striking documented examples of value destruction in American residential real estate. A $46 million construction cost. A $10.3 million auction floor. A buyer pool so thin it bordered on non-existent. Maintenance costs that made ownership a financial burden. a location and style that the market had consistently, politely declined. Whether the house ultimately sold, and for exactly how much, isn't always cleanly documented in the public record. But the story is already complete. Because whatever came after, the collapse from $46 million to that auction floor already happened. That number does not go away. So here is the question Champdor leaves behind. Would you buy it? Not in theory. Really think about it. A 26,000 square foot French chateau in North Texas. $500,000 a year to run. Property taxes in the six figures. An exit strategy that's more prayer than plan. A resale market that has already told you very clearly what it thinks. And yet, walk through those rooms, and you understand completely why someone spent $46 million building it. The quality is real. The beauty is undeniable. The vision behind it is extraordinary. But understanding why it was built, and understanding why it couldn't be sold, those are two completely different things. And Champdor forces you to hold both of those truths at the same time. Champdor, Field of Gold. The name still fits. Just not the way its builders intended. Because gold, in real estate, is only worth what someone will pay for it on the day you need to sell. And on that day, the day that always comes eventually, Champdor discovered something that no amount of stone, chandeliers, or hand-carved detail could change. A property is worth what the market says it's worth, not $1 more.